of the Leonhard-Woltjer Foundation, Palestine Link and the Sen Foundation in cooperation with the American Book Center. We're happy to have you here today. It's my pleasure. No problem. It is my pleasure to introduce to you today Professor Peled-Elhanan. Professor Nurit works at the Hebrew University. She is also, she got the award, the Zakharov Award from the European Parliament for the free thought. Yeah, freedom of thought. And she is at the moment in a tour to universities in the Netherlands. She's been here since Sunday, but today she told me she doesn't know which day today is. So it has been very busy. We've been from the north to the south presenting her book. We're happy to have her here, and I'll give her the word. Afterwards, if you have any questions, you can, of course, ask your questions to her. And then there will be a possibility for you to buy the book and for her to sign the book if you like.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, I've been presenting the book for a week now, but I'll make a short version of the talk. The book is about representation of Palestinians and Palestine in Israeli school books. The study is a study that touches on verbal text and visual texts, a semiotic study, and try to see every page, every double spread, every chapter as a whole unit of meaning, and to ask, what does these units of meaning say to students, Israeli students, who eventually will go to the army and will be asked to carry on the practices of occupation of Palestine. The question that really bothered me was, what is the part of education in educating these young people to become so inhuman once they are in uniform? How can you explain that? Children that receive a very humanistic, open, modern, as well as ancient Jewish education, suddenly, when they put on uniform, become such monsters. And of course, textbooks are not the only means by which it happens, but textbooks are still a very important tool in forming identity, both national and individual identity. Now in Israel, personal and national identities are very interfused. When you ask people, or when I ask students to identify themselves or to define themselves, they will say, I'm a Zionist, I'm there, okay? They would not say, I'm a mother, I love poetry, and so on. So Israeli education is very dedicated to produce this kind of territorial and national identity for all children in order exactly to prepare them to be good soldiers. From the age of 3, they know that they are going to be soldiers. There's a lot of military coming into kindergartens and schools to indoctrinate the children about the army. The army is the peak of everybody's aspiration and of education. And all the books in all subjects are geared to that. Now, I only studied books of history, geography, and civic studies, but we can say that also about books of literature, literacy, of course, Bible, Jewish thought, and so on and so forth. They are all recruited to produce this kind of person that will go to the army and will do whatever it takes to keep a Jewish majority on the land of Israel, which means Israel and Palestine. Now in Israel, nobody learns about the state of Israel. No book is called the state of Israel. They're all called the land of Israel. Land of Israel means the greater land of Israel, from the Jordan to the sea. The state of Israel is represented as one part of the land of Israel, which is all ours. We have historical rights on it since the Bible. And the state of Israel is something temporary that was caused by accidental, almost, ceasefire during the wars, but in no way is it the permanent situation, and that's why you don't see on any map, for example, the international borders. Nobody knows the international borders. For 3 generations already, people in Israel don't even know what the borders are. The land of Palestine is appropriated, is considered our land. For example, in maps depicting universities in Israel, you will have the tiniest extension of universities in the settlements across the border, but you will not have any major Palestinian university. On the map of Jerusalem, you will have cultural, national, administrative sites on the side of West Jerusalem, whereas East Jerusalem is completely empty, except for the Wailing Wall. Palestinian life and life world is not represented in any way in the books. They are not part of the economy, of the culture, of education, of the professions. You never see or never hear about a Palestinian citizen who is a doctor or teacher or whatever, or a child. They are only depicted as problems and threats, of which the largest and most severe is the demographic problem, and then the security problem, of course, and a developmental burden, because they're primitive, they're clannish, they don't want to develop, and so on and so forth. And we speak here about people who live 200 meters from me. But since Israel has managed to live in a way that Israelis and Palestinians never meet, it is quite easy to create this kind of image. Even Palestinian citizens who are called in the Israeli discourse and in textbooks the Arabs of the land of Israel are depicted in this way. This sort of representation in which you present people in such a negative, stereotypically way is considered racist in the world by sociologists, by discourse analysts, and by people who study racism. To represent people as one homogeneous group that has negative features. So I started to study very deeply the question of racist discourse and to see how it is manifested in the books. Unfortunately, it is manifested very thoroughly. And one of the most important features of racist discourse that must be considered is the way you distinction the other from all the realms of life, including human rights and the rights to live. Because Palestinians, as you know, in Israel do not have any human rights. They cannot plead their cause in any court. They are completely submitted to military regime and military court, and now we have a new law that says anyone who doesn't have an Israeli ID cannot appeal to the court of law, which means no way. And therefore, their blood is dispensable with impunity. Anybody can kill Palestinians and not be punished for it. And that means children, women, whatever. And how do you explain that to children who are brought up on very humanistic Jewish values of respect for the foreigner, respect for the other, and so on and so forth? So the way the books do it is really very interesting. Among other things, by presenting Israel as a defensive democracy that has to defend itself against terror and so on and so forth, and by legitimating killing Palestinians by all kinds of means of legitimation, especially by far-reach consequences. For example, the massacre of Deir Yassin caused the massive flight of all the Arabs from the land of Israel, and that is why we could establish a state with a Jewish majority, and this was a miracle. So maybe killing them was very unfortunate, but at the end of the day, it was best for us. This kind of discourse, this kind of talk is not compatible with discourse of real history books, of real historians, or of real geography books, or of real sociologists. But it is the discourse of the disciplines manipulated by politicians, by generals, by lawyers, by all those people who manipulate discourse. And this is what the children learn. They learn to manipulate discourse and to get away with crimes, really, against humanity. And many of the explanations we get in the books for things past, we hear today, for example, regarding Gaza and so on and so forth. So there is a sort of continuation and consistency in this kind of discourse, which really pushes Palestinian to the edge of consciousness and to the edge of culture, society, and humanity. They have no humanity. Altogether, I analyzed, I think 16 or 17 books here. All belong to the mainstream educational, to mainstream education in Israel, meaning the secular state schools. Because in Israel we have all kinds of schools. Secular state schools, which are the majority, and I took the books that were published after the Oslo Agreement to see if there's any change. Unfortunately, there's no change, or there is change for the worse. In the last year, there is a terrible regression in the books. They become more and more like political and military manifests, more than scientific books. But also scientific books abuse scientific discourse, both visual, graphs, diagrams, and things that we are very used to see as objective, neutral, and therefore true, and verbal discourse, scientific discourse, which we know racism has always used. I think this does explain a little bit what happens in Israel. And it does explain a little bit why young, good boys and girls become monsters once they put on a uniform. Again, it's not all of it, but it's part of it. And I also think the book was worthwhile working on because nobody supervises Israel from outside, ever. Whereas Palestinian education system, which is slandered all over the world, is very closely supervised by the European Union and by several governments that finance it and help it, and therefore cannot be racist and cannot be insightful. Israeli textbooks are not supervised by anybody. It's a free trade. Everybody can write a book. It has to be authorized by the ministry. In order to be authorized by the ministry, it has to be Zionist. And they have certain rules for what Zionist means. You have to emphasize Jewish yearning for Zion much more than global processes that brought about the establishment of the State of Israel. You have to emphasize our historical rights on the land. You have to emphasize anti-Semitism, Arab threat, and so on and so forth, and the supreme importance of having a Jewish majority. So that the books on the left side, the books on the right side, differ only in the way they emphasize the measures of keeping a Jewish majority, but not in ideology, not in principle. In that, nothing had changed since the 50s, where they were really very racist and stereotypical. Today, even though archives are open and people can go and look and write some better books, it doesn't happen because they have to be authorized. And for example, there is no way you can bring the Palestinian version of things, the Palestinian narrative. Just now, one inspector of civic studies suggested to include other narratives, and he was immediately fired. Now he's back in his job by Supreme Court ruling, but I'm sure they'll find a way to kick him out again. And the other narrative does not have any place. Not only that, but when describing events that affected Palestinian lives, like wars and massacres and confiscation of land and all these things, there is no word about them, what happened to them after that, because this is not important. They are not victims. I don't know if you know, but in Israel, journalists and writers of school books are not allowed to call Palestinian victims. They are corpses, they are, I don't know what. And there is no empathy in the writing about their misfortunes. It's like writing really about, I should say, cattle, or plague, or mosquitoes, or things like that. And this is the way children are really taught to see these people as non-humans, and then treat them as such. This is called in the literature elite racism, which means racism that is produced from above and then inculcated downwards and implemented in all the areas of living, of everyday practices, and of course in the army and in places like that, where you see it much more blatant than in other areas. I think I covered it a little bit now, but if you have questions, I will be more specific. Yeah.
Can I ask you, are you Jewish yourself? Are you from Israel?
Yes.
And,
I forgot to say that.
No, just to start with, how could you escape this brainwashing? Did you have parents who really thought about those things? Or
I guess so.
Yeah?
You know, I think the human in us is that we think we are machines, but sometimes we are, screwed up machines, and this enables us to become human. Sometimes it doesn't work as it should, and then your humanity comes. Yes, I come from a very critical family, and so on and so forth. Yes, of course. Yeah.
And did you, of course, you had a lot of trouble, I think, in Israel by writing the book.
No.
They actually write it. I mean.
This was published in London by Taurus Publishers.
But can one buy it in Israel?
Yes, of course, you can buy anything. Oh. And I also teach that at the university, so yes. We have democracy for the Jews.
Even if they.
Yeah, of course.
Right.
No, all the libraries bought it, and yeah.
You went to the government, did you?
To this government?
Yes.
Yes.
Did you talk to the Christian party?
Excuse me?
Did you?
No, we went only to our friends.
No, we went to the parliament, but the timing is actually very difficult because of the elections, and we were in the parliament on the day that it was the farewell of the old parliaments, and the new parliament is not yet there. Well, today they started, so that was unlucky.
We left a book for the Minister of Foreign Affairs. So.
Oh,
he received
The dedication, yeah.
We have the Christian uni here, and the buitenland voortvoeren.
the spokesperson for
Foreign affairs.
Foreign Affairs
Affairs.
spokesperson.
He's visiting Israel all the time. And he's always talking about
Palestinian school books.
the Palestinian school books who are terrible and they teach the children hate.
No, this is not true.
No.
First of all the Palestinian school books are translated and you can see them on the internet if you want. And then, as I told you, they are so supervised that they cannot be racist even if they want to. Of course, there are other books that are not issued by the Ministry of Education, but then in Israel also there are horrible books issued by private, for example, by rabbis. We have two books that are very controversial, one that encourages the killing of enemy babies, and the other that encourages the rape of enemy women. But I will not talk about those because these are not the official educational, although they were written by great rabbis, which is a problem. But, so they have many things. But Palestinians did not have their own books and could not write their own history until 2000. So it is something that they just started to do. And before that, they studied from books that came from Jordan and Egypt, and they are really full of slander. But Palestinian school books, first of all, they write very respectfully about Judaism. And they do say Zionism is our enemy and so on, but this is not racism, okay? And besides, these books, by the time they reach the children, at least in East Jerusalem, all the pages that have to do with nationality or with human rights or with Zionism are erased by the Ministry of Education, by the Israeli Ministry of Education. So they get books with blank pages. Anyway. But this is not true about Palestinian textbooks. It's just not true. And you can see that. You can see them all on the internet. Yeah.
I'm sure there are more people thinking the same as you think in the country. How do you work together? Is there a platform or are you a solo? I'm sure there are more.
No, there are more, of course.
Yes. So
There are many, not many, but there are groups of people that, of course, think the same and write the same, but the number is quite small, really.
that's the strength.
Yeah, I had a book launch in a similar shop in East Jerusalem called the Educational Bookstore, and the evening was moderated by Ilan Pape, and he said 10 or 15 years ago we would have seen many more Israelis. And that night there were about 10 Israelis among 200 people who were there.
How come?
Because I think most of these people just left. Or, I don't know, changed their mind, I don't know.
Self-criticism.
Or,
Ilan Pape is himself a controversial...
yeah, he's very controversial, and he left. Yeah, he's in Exeter. So not many remained, but yet there is, for example, a very nice movement organization, I don't know how to call them, group called Political Teacher. And they meet every month and they think what to do and they do alternative things. For example, I don't know if you know, but the Ministry of Education in Israel now said that all the children must go to Hebron and say 10 times, this is ours, this is ours, this is ours, and to David City, which is Silwan, that they are destroying. And it's very intentional to manifest power and control and indoctrination and so on. So these teachers do alternative things. And there are many organizations like Iramim, like but regarding teaching, Emak Shaveh, which is a group of archaeologists that show you Jerusalem differently, and Zochrot, I don't know if you know, the Association of Zochrot, that really dedicate their work to teaching Jewish children about the Nakba. And of course what they do is not permitted, is not allowed in schools, but all my students who are teachers have to read it and consider it, and they can use it if they want, because again, there's a lot of freedom in education in Israel, I mean, until you're caught or something. But so all these organizations are organizations that decided to educate differently. And they have a lot of materials. It's not official,
But
Okay.
it's important to cherish each other and to respect each other, I think, at least.
Yeah, everybody knows everybody else, and we are the same people, more or less. Yeah,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
Of course, some people, belong to several organizations.
Yeah. But I hope it's growing because I
Yeah, I
really
hope
think,
so too.
yeah, because if you want to have a certain kind of transformation, I think these kind of groups are the base
Sure.
to do it. You know.
Yeah, and you have rabbis for human rights. You have many groups that really teach otherwise,
Yeah.
but they are not official. Yes.
Would you say then that the portrayal of Palestine in Israeli school books is a preparation, either consciously or subconsciously, for Israeli kids before they go to the army, that then the army then just becomes an extension of...
Absolutely, yes. And I don't call it conscious or subconscious, but I call it motivated.
Yeah, okay.
Yes, it's motivated by interests and by beliefs and by whatever purpose. But yes, of course. I mean, when you look at it, you say, okay, look, children are not really interested in geography, history, and sociology when they're 16, 17. They have to study these books for the matriculation. So this is the only thing they know. This, together with all kinds of brainwashing and mind infections coming from youth movements and the media and literature and this and that, prepares them for this big day when they are going to save their country by pushing away the invaders, the intruders who are the Palestinians. That's for sure. There's no doubt about it. Yeah.
I remember 3 years ago there was a presentation here in The Hague by an Israeli history professor who worked together with Palestinian colleagues in a kind of project group to make to do an attempt to get the common narrative.
Right.
And there were lots of obstacles and sabotage and all that. But what's the position of that group? Does it still exist? Is there a product?
Yeah, they have 4 booklets, but it's not a common narrative.
Oh.
What they do, they put the 2 narratives, one opposite the other, and in between you have space for the children to write whatever they want, which is good. And the narratives are the official narratives as you find them here. They don't change anything. As to the Palestinian narrative, because Palestinian history is just being written, they do it with the teacher, with the children, with the grandparents, and so on. It looks different. They have already 4 booklets, but this is not allowed in schools.
Absolutely.
Yeah, there was one school that was using it, and they were stupid enough to advertise it, and it was prohibited. The Palestinian Authority allowed to use this for a project, like 2 weeks experiment or something like that, but in Israel, not even that. The man, I believe, is Eyal Naveh, because he's the professor. Dan Baron was a psychologist. He accompanied this project. He's dead now. Eyal Naveh is the historian, and he writes school books that are authorized by the ministry and look very different. I mean, okay. I met him in a conference, and he said, I never thought in my worst dreams that I would be attacked from the left. But he does what he has to do in order to be authorized, like saying that a massacre was very good for the morale of the citizens and so on and so forth, which he has to do.
Propaganda.
To use this. But his books are really much better than others, much better than others, and not very used because the teachers say they're difficult. Okay? But yes, he's the one, and now I think they got new budget from new source, and they go on. They go on, and it's a very good project, very nice project. They do it with teachers. They do it with teachers. They decide on the narrative, on the chapter. They go back to their classes. They get criticism and so on and so forth, and they change it again and again and again. Yeah, but it's not authorized at all.
You said yourself are teaching at the university. Now, if so, you are meeting students who have gone through reading this book, being led into the army and being socialized by the army along the same track. And you then after the army, because you have to go into the army first and then you can go to university as a Jewish Israeli. Then you get them into class and you confront them with, I assume, a different narrative, different stories. I mean, can you describe what happened? And secondly, there must also for people to be possibilities to escape along in the whole trajectory. I mean, from a child to university, which you have described to me. That there are pulls and pushes. Which like family or others, which might influence. So I'm very interested to what your experience is. Having these students in class having, let's say, the words brainwashed, into a mold, and then what happens?
I teach teachers, so they are a bit older, usually for the master's degree. But I also teach in a teacher's college, and there I really get them right after the army. They don't know much. They're so ignorant because this education really perpetuates ignorance. They don't know anything. What I do really is, first of all, I speak about racism towards Jews in Israel. Because in Israel you have a lot of ethnicities, Jewish ethnicities, that have very little to do with each other. One is dominating, which is called Ashkenazi or whatever, and all the others vanished. They are not represented in school books at all, just like the Palestinian. So we start from that. And when you start from that, they have their own experiences to speak about, or the experience of the parents, how they were being marginalized, especially those who came from Arab countries, how they were being marginalized, how they had to give up the culture, the music, the pronunciation, etc., etc., etc. By the time they are sensibilized to this, I start introducing this is my trick, I start introducing the Palestinian thing. And to my surprise, and I'm really surprised every time again, there is no or hardly ever opposition. They take it wholeheartedly, they read a lot, and when I get their papers, I'm always amazed how they really open their eyes and how they go on doing it. And I always get these letters. It was an eye-opener. It's the first time that I really understood what's going on, and so on and so forth. I don't know how they will go on with it once they are in class, under supervision, and this and that, but I'm always surprised at the way that once they know, they go on learning. And once you know, you cannot unknow.
Do they feel to some extent betrayed?
Yes, especially those who already have children at school. They're really enraged, really. Teachers that, that are about, 40 years old and so on, and have children at school, they say, we never looked at the books, really. We never thought about it, and look what they've done. And yes, they do. And they are and not only teachers, we have in the college, we have groups of functionaries who want to get a BA in order to get a better salary, and somebody told them that education is very easy, and then poor things, they end up in my class. And I had a group of Mossad and Shabak people, and it was amazing to see the transformation and how much they read, and how enlightened they became, and they really changed. And they invited the organization, like Political Teacher and Zochrot and Parent Circle and so on, into class. So I think that Israeli education really succeeds, maybe like any other education, in inculcating ignorance. And when you are ignorant, especially of the other, you develop fear, and fear leads to racism very, very easily. But they do it not only with Palestinians, they do it with Jewish ethnicities. Because racism doesn't stop at the checkpoint. And when you realize that, you become angry, and you want to know more. And then really, I've never seen people read so much as in this course.
It's also has to do with monotheism, you know, it's a one single God religion, Judaism. How is this combined with their way of looking at the world? Because where does it stop? Huh?
Monotheism?
Yeah, monotheism. I
Yeah,
don't know the
fine.
English word.
No, why?
Yeah, I think it's combined. Huh? It's if you have a religion that is monetized, then there is always a kind of discrimination involved.
Yes, of course. Well, not only in religion, every ideology.
Yeah.
Every ideology that defines us
Yeah.
excludes the others.
Yeah.
Yes, of course. Yeah, I don't think they're. Yeah, of
But
course.
in the long run, how do you see the development in that? Or how do you see it, you know?
Bad. No, things are very bad, and I don't think I make a difference really.
May I add a question to that, to your question? It's because in the long run, you say in the long run, assume that this so-called two-state solution, which is not moving forward an inch in the last 45 years, let's assume it doesn't happen. There's no two-state solution, and in the longer term you see a greater Israel with about 11 million inhabitants. And what you tell me, and what you tell us, is it's like a pressure cooker. One day you have 11, 12, 13 million inhabitants. Today, the total is already controlled by Israel, by the Israeli government. It's about 10, 11 million people. On the one hand, you have the ideology and the illusion of a greater Israel as it is supposed to be. At the same time, you know that you'll have these ethnically completely different peoples and groups and apartheid in the extreme. So this pressure cooker, the funny thing is, if the ideal of the real Zionist happens, it's a disaster.
Right.
And if it doesn't happen, they consider it themselves also a disaster. So how is this going to develop?
Disaster.
Disaster. We never know. Listen, we cannot know how things will develop, but the facts are that there is one state of which half the population lives with no human rights.
Exactly.
This is on the ground, this is the reality, and this reality is horrible. And I think that if the world had cared a bit more, the world would have done something. Okay, America, Europe, but nobody does. Nobody does. People enjoy seeing it collapsing. And of course, this is it. And democratic values and institutions collapse. It's not a democracy. Israel advertises itself as a democracy, but there's nothing democratic about it. Only last year we had 23 racist laws suggested and 11 approved. Racist laws of race, nothing else. So it's going very, very badly. And you know, maybe at the peak of evil, they'll start looking around. But as it is now, yeah, it's very bad. And the world is silent. I think this is the most horrible thing. The world is silent. Nobody does anything because everybody gains from that. Everybody gains from that.
Yeah, ignorance as well. Will there not be a kind of evolution of the religion on itself, the humanism in the religion? You know, I think you can see that with Christianity and with maybe other religions. Can it be also in that society or that circumstances?
I think that the Jewish religion is destroyed in Israel. I mean, the kind of Judaism you have there, this kind of fascism, or what Professor Leibovich called Judeo-Nazism, this is what he called it. This is not Judaism as people know Judaism from the world. Judaism is all about dialogue.
Aren't you being extreme to say that?
No, I'm not saying. I said Professor Leibovich determined it like that. But it is going very, very to a very, very fascist kind of regime, and Judaism as we know it from the world, from the diaspora, is about dialogue, is about compassion, is about universalism, is about multi-layered opinions and perspectives, and even ancient Judaism, because the way Jewish studies were conducted in Talmudic times, it's all about dialogue and disagreement and controversies, and this was the idea. I mean, the verb that is so fashionable today in all disciplines, which is the verb to problematize, we have it for 4,000 years. Lehakshot, kushiyah, what you say, Pesach, which means to problematize, to really make things hard, to ask hard questions. What happens in Israel is nothing like it, either in the religious part or in the secular part. So it really narrows down Judaism, and there's very little
And there's still people.
between this and what the world knows as Jewish thought.
Yeah, and are there still rabbis who promote the...
Oh yes, yes, yes. There are this movement of rabbis for human rights, for example, on wonderful day. Of course, there are a lot, but there are also the others.
Yeah.
And the others receive the support of the government. This is the point. See, they receive the support because they serve this kind of fascist. Yeah.
Sorry.
Sorry.
I had a few questions. You say, because you emphasized a few times that there's real freedom in Jewish education, but
Yes.
But still, on the other hand, there was some censorship. I didn't really get. For example, you were not allowed. You said to talk about to call the Palestinians victims. Where is that, in school books, or is that a general?
This is an instruction that I saw by chance in a document, in a sheet of instructions distributed to journalists.
Also, so is it, but it's not.
In school books, they are never called victims.
Okay, but it's not punishable if there's freedom
No,
of press.
I don't know, but
That's just a guideline.
it never happens. Okay, it never happens.
Okay.
They never say victims about Palestinians.
Even, but is that,
Even in Gaza, they are not victims.
is that true for in school, high school, secondary education, primary education, or in university? I guess it is.
Always.
You can read anything.
Yeah,
Why not?
university is different, of course. If you go in you know, it depends on the professor, on the books, and the text, of course.
There's
But
more
I'm talking
freedom.
about school, and I'm
Yeah,
talking
yeah.
about journals. Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
You can study with whoever you want. Yeah, sure. But when I said that there is freedom, I mean that the way you conduct your lesson is not prescribed. I
Okay.
mean, the curriculum is kind of suggestions and expectations. And I know other systems of education, like in the States or in the UK or in France, they are much stricter. And there's one book administered by the ministry, and this is the book you have to study. In Israel, you can choose any book you want,
But I guess also
but they have to be authorized.
now less and less maybe information goes via books, but I guess everyone has access to internet. So how I mean, they will read a different narrative on the internet. They're intelligent, so I guess they're gonna have them questions. So it's not. How long is it still gonna work?
If you show me one 16-year-old who goes to the internet to read about historical narratives, I'll be happy. Usually they're not interested in that. Okay? Not in that. In girls, in disco, in I don't know, smoking pots, whatever. And this is not interesting to young people. It's not interesting.
Or maybe
Show me people here of 16 who go to verify the facts in their school books.
I think that would be normal, no?
No.
or
No.
maybe
No way.
No.
There will be maybe 2 or 3 in each class, and these 2 or 3 are really distinguished, and maybe these are the one who refuse to go to the army
It's
after
the
that, and
age.
so on.
It's the age.
But the most of them just, they don't care. They want to pass the exam and
Yeah.
go on.
I'm teaching business ethics, and it's young people. And some of them are very smart and introspective, you know, but it's the majority is
No,
not
but as you
there.
say, this is so central to the Israeli identity that I guess even from maybe young people looking for their own identity, they will.
No, it's
They don't
very-
care. They
If
don't
they have
care.
international friends, maybe they're gonna get questions about
They
it.
don't have international friends. They are stuck
By
in this
Facebook
language that
or
nobody
whatever.
else speaks. And this is another thing.
But I guess most speak English. So they,
No. Yeah, this is another thing. They live in a language that nobody else speaks in the world and nobody else writes in. And this is another thing that really closes them in this spiritual ghetto when they are young. Of course, afterwards, they can do whatever they want, depends on the parents, it depends on a lot of things. But usually, when you go to class, this is not the thing that interests young people. Okay? Not even young Palestinians, by the way.
Yeah.
Okay.
From whom you would expect even more engagement.
You wanted to ask, and then we'll wrap it up. There will be a break afterwards, and those who would like to buy the book can buy it downstairs, and Professor Nurit would be here to sign the book if you like.
A question, there is at least 1 million of Arabs with Israeli passport or living in, and do they study the same book or?
Yes, they study the same books mostly, translated to Arabic. So they really study the Zionist narrative and they hail the Zionist project and so on and so forth. And one of the
exposed to this brainwashing
the same. And one of the things that they say really is that they don't know their own culture and their own history. And you see, Arabic is an official language in Israel, and by law we should have had Arab universities in Arabic, and we don't have even one. And then they have to go and study in Hebrew universities, and it's very hard for them. And one of the complaints of these people is that they don't know enough of their own, they don't know enough of the other, they know that the other is all lies and, not of to their liking. But if they want to succeed, if they want to get a degree, this is what they have to do. And their situation is really, really pitiful. Really.
And also the other Arabs are described as well as the Palestine.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Arab citizens are described as enemy from within, as developmental burden, as clannish, as primitive. And visually, when you see, for example, books for children that where you have, all kinds of comics of their society, you never see anybody Arabic as a teacher. There's one series of books for 3rd grade that is called Living Together in Israel. So you have a gang of children who show you Israel and this and that. They're all white. So they don't have Ethiopians, they don't have Yemenites, they don't have many who are there, and of course not Arabs. And they show you Israel, which is, European kind of Israel. And then at the end of every chapter, they have something called a small window or something like that. So at the margin, on a different color background, you meet the Bedouin boy, the Arab girl, the Druze boy, the Ethiopian boy. So the children learn visually who is in the center and who is in the margin. You don't need to say any more. And when they describe their life, they describe it as if they live on an island with no connection to the other things in the book. And this is 3rd grade. So really, this is enough to understand who is important, who is less important. And this is motivated, as I said. Even if the people who wrote it will swear they're not racist or anything. This is it. Yeah.
I don't have a question. I only want to tell you something. We were talking now about the people from Israel, how they react and how they do these things wrong. This regard to the history of the Palestinians. I'm Dutch. I'm 66. When I was 25, I started to investigate how these things could happen. And I passed it on to my son, who is 27 now. In Holland, if you raise the Palestinian history, people rather look away from you, and immediately you are anti-Semite. Yeah? Maybe you are in a village, but it's very difficult here to explain things, to talk about it. It's not only in Israel.
Yeah, but here nobody gets killed.
Okay, but still,
sometimes they do.
But they also keep alive that the Palestinian matter isn't explained, and that the world doesn't know the real history.
Doesn't know and doesn't want to know. Paul Ricoeur has a huge book about memory, and he says that the strongest driving force of national narratives, who are always different from history, is the wanting not to know. People want not to know. And this helps the formation of these narratives, and it's very, very hard after that to dissolve them and to bring something else, of course. But I'll just tell you that most of the literature that I relied on regarding racism, both in textbooks and in society, come from here. Yeah, come from here, from the study of this culture by Dutch scholars who really, really write a lot about that. Yeah. Van Dijk, Van Leuven, Philomena Essed, a lot of people. Yeah.
This notion I would like to close, and I would like to thank you all for being here, and thank you very much, Professor Peled, for this very good lecture.
Thank you.